All right, good afternoon, members of the audience and the public and council, staff. It's 5 o'clock, time to get down to business, so we will call the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee meeting of March 4, 2020 to order. Today we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. And I'll look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda. Deputy Mayor?
So moved, Mayor Saunders.
Seconded by Councillor Doherty. That the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for March 4, 2020 be adopted as presented. I will be making one change. We have our integrity commissioners here, and I propose to move them from 8.2 to 4.1 because we are paying them, and so it makes sense to have them wait. So unless there's any objection to that, I will call for the approval of the agenda. All in favor? That is approved unanimously. Declarations of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Any declarations? Seeing none, and if you find yourself in that situation as we move forward, please let us know. That brings us to deputations, and as I said before, I'm going to take item 8.2, which is the Principals Integrity Annual Report from Jeffrey Abrams and Janice Atwood-Petkovsky to 4.1. So I will ask them to come forward, please, and deliver their report. Welcome. Is the microphone on?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for moving us up, and thank you for the opportunity to be here back with you again. It's been a little while, and we're always happy to be back in the beautiful town of Collingwood. So our report, it's an annual report, but we like to use this as an opportunity to get back in front of council for just a few minutes to sort of reconnect, and we'll touch on our report at a high level and respond to any questions if there are any. So we set out in the report again what we see as the key roles of the Integrity Commissioner. This is really what the legislation has set forward, and we think that Collingwood Council has really embraced this. We see the primary function of an Integrity Commissioner to really provide training, coaching, and advice, and really only the residual obligation to investigate if and when necessary, and whenever possible we try to resolve complaints when they come forward if it's possible to do so without a full investigation. So I won't drag you chapter and verse through the 2 or 3 pages that set out what our authority is under the legislation, but I'll turn you to what our activity has been for the town of Collingwood since our appointment. So you will recall that we were appointed as your Integrity Commissioner in January of 2018. So throughout this period we have had the opportunity to provide training. Shortly after the municipal election in 2018, we were with you and provided orientation and training, and we also had the opportunity to come back in April of 2019 and provide training for members of your local boards and bills. Both of those opportunities were very well received, and as well as a result of largely of you understanding what services we can provide by way of advice. We have received and fielded a dozen requests for advice, and when we provide that advice, we provide it in writing. That really creates, in a sense, bulletproofing and binding advice. If the member receives the advice, then if the member follows that advice and provided that the facts remain the same, that's binding on us, and in the event there is a complaint, that basically downs the ball. So we have provided, as I say, 12 advice memorandums in response to members' requests to us. And we have fielded complaints filed with us. So we have had a couple of complaints which we were able to resolve without full investigation, and then we had one which did involve a full investigation and a public report. So we are Integrity Commissioner for about 40 municipalities around Ontario, and in that, from that perspective, we have the opportunity to see some of the themes that are recurring in various municipalities, and we try to share that back with our clients. One of the key themes we see reflected in some municipalities is members engaging in disrespectful or disparaging conduct. And sometimes we remind councillors that regardless of the motive, they really have to recognize that they can't be disparaging of each other or of the decisions of council. So that will avoid a lot of complaints in the future for a lot of municipalities. And another area where we've fielded quite a number of inquiries in other municipalities particularly is understanding conflicts of interest. It can be complicated, and we like to help provide advice to members to be able to avoid having a conflict of interest when their interest is engaged in a matter before council. And another area that has been subject to some questions in some municipalities is with respect to gifts. So those are sort of the themes that we've noticed are, I think they repeat themselves throughout many of the municipalities that we provide services for. And otherwise we have, we think that Council for Collingwood really understands the role that we serve, and we see that reflected when we are fielding requests for guidance and advice from members. And so we certainly welcome that continued engagement, and we look for opportunities to serve you. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Good, thank you very much for that presentation and for the conciseness and brevity. Council, are there any questions for our Integrity Commissioners about the report we're receiving today? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, to our Integrity Commissioners. You mentioned that there were 12 points of contact between January the 1st of 2018 and September the 30th of 2019. Rather an important event took place halfway between there, and that is the inauguration of this particular council, which took place on December the 3rd of 2019. Can you perhaps delineate to me how many of those points of contact that you're reporting here took place prior to December 3rd, 2019, and how many after?
So the bulk of those were prior to that date, and there have been 3 or 4 points of contact after that date.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Council? Seeing none, thank you very much for the travel, safe trip home, and for all the services you provide. So I will look, sorry. This is a dedication, as I see you. For reports and guidance. Okay. Looking to the clerk, on the basis that this was under other business initially, and that we will be passing a motion to receive the report, I will open the floor to comments from the public about the report and any questions the public may have about the report we just received from our Integrity Commissioners. Come on forward, Matthew. You know the drill, Matthew, so state your name for the record, please, and sign the sheet behind you on your way.
This is a good opportunity. My name is Matthew. I live in town. I'm an East End resident, and I'll write the address privately on a piece of paper. Something that comes to mind, this is sort of interesting, the ability to take direction between departments and council. And the committees, I saw something interesting the other day about changing the cycling and trails committee to an active transportation committee to kind of try and do 5 things instead of like 1 or 2. My question would be to this consultant group, how can direction be taken at the will of the town's people and development? What's the best way for a department and a town council to take direction from development and its residents? What's the better way to take direction? Through a series of questions, having more, questions that are handed out to people, that type of feedback. Like I've noticed in my own discourse, the importance of trying to connect on questions. What would this group recommend us? Do you know what I mean? Are they able to talk about that, or it's a case
Matthew,
closed?
so the integrity commissioners
Yeah.
are here to give advice to council members about situations where they're concerned about ethical things, about
Yeah.
conflict of interest.
So we have to read the whole PDF.
And if there's a complaint about a conduct of a council member, it would go through our integrity commissioners. In terms of the
I see,
process,
it's a process.
about how the public would,
Ah.
if you have a concern about the actions of a council member, you make a complaint.
Mhm.
If you have concerns about the direction of council
I see.
generally, that's something you have to speak to council
So it's
about.
talking about process versus too much direction.
Yes, it's more of a process-oriented thing to ensure that the
Yeah.
process is open and transparent and accountable.
And that there is a process happening.
Yes,
Okay,
okay,
sounds good. So that's what you have learned and so forth
that's what their
from
role is.
their notes.
So the
and
province has now
inquiry.
mandated that all communities have,
Mhm.
local governments have
Yeah.
integrity commissioners.
Oh,
So we have retained principals,
Mhm.
and then they respond to any complaints or requests for advice from council.
Yeah.
So they're a sounding board to make sure that we are internally doing our jobs.
Yeah, true.
Okay,
Okay,
great,
fair enough.
good. Thank you, Matthew. Are there any other questions from the public? Seeing none, then I'm gonna look for a motion to receive the report. Moved by Councillor Hamlin, seconded by Councillor Berman. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. Don't feel compelled to stay. And have a safe trip home. Thank you very much. Going back to the agenda then, I will now move to item which was previously 4.1, and that is the Collingwood Youth Advisory Council initiatives. And we have with us Lee Pankhurst, Ariane McCullough, and Celeste Bubel. And I'll ask them to come forward, please.
Good evening, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. My name is Lee Pankhurst. I'm the manager of the Collingwood Youth Centre. I just wanted to make a slight change. We actually haven't got Ariana with us today. We've got Maya Colborne instead. Okay. So, like I say, thank you very much for having us. We're here today to talk to you a little bit about the Youth Advisory Council that we've started setting up at the Collingwood Youth Centre. We're looking to solidify and strengthen ties between that group of youth and the town as we move forward. So I'm going to hand straight over to Celeste, who's going to give a little bit of background about the centre and what we do.
So I'm Celeste, and I'm just going to, like Lee said, give a little bit of background. So good evening, members of the committee. Thank you so much for letting us address you this evening. We are here as representatives of the newly formed Collingwood Youth Advisory Council, ran out of the Collingwood Youth Centre. The Collingwood Youth Advisory is a group put together with the intention to address and find solutions that affect youth in Collingwood. The Collingwood Youth Centre was built with youth in mind, and we, as youth, are made to feel safe, inclusive, and welcome. At the Centre, we are encouraged to be curious, be innovative, and use our talents and skills in many different ways. In our view as youth, we hope to be the foundation for a strong, inclusive, and thriving Collingwood community. The Centre works to create a safe, relaxing, and respectful environment that celebrates youth culture in all its diversity. With safety, we enjoy freedom to explore opportunities for personal development, tackle problems, and even achieve new goals. The Collingwood Youth Centre offers all kinds of great things for youth to do, including a technology centre, a recording studio, a culinary kitchen, and various other programs. The CYC is the perfect after-school hub for us to learn, socialize, and have fun. We will now show two videos that show a virtual tour of the centre and our extremely popular Kids Feeding Kids program.
Youth Centre was built with youth in mind. We want youth to feel safe and welcome. We want youth to build their skills
invest in youth, encourage their curiosity, and appreciate their talents and innovative ideas, they will soar. In our view, youth is the foundation of a strong future and thriving Collingwood community. We work with youth to create a safe, relaxing, and respectful environment that celebrates youth culture in all its diversity. With safety comes freedom, for youth to explore opportunities for personal development, tackle problems, and even achieve new goals. Collingwood Youth Centre offers all kinds of great things for youth to do, including a technology center, a recording studio, a culinary kitchen, and tons more. Think of us as your hub where you can learn, socialize, and have fun.
It's loading.
And we're just, everyone's on tender hooks, yeah.
Doesn't come out of your time allotment.
Program is led by local chef Rob Liberty and will lead the youth participating to create healthy meals and advanced skills in the kitchen. The program involves meal planning, sourcing nutritional ingredients, prepping, and preparing food. Youth will advance their culinary skills and become experts in the kitchen. Chef Rob trains youth on how to make a diverse selection of foods, including dishes from all over the world. The food prepared remains at the CYC for all to enjoy throughout the week. This program starts every Friday night starting at 6 p.m. Hope to see you there. Right. So the Collingwood Youth Centre has recently identified 2 initiatives that the Youth Advisory Council would like to help pursue. These are taking on an active role in the organization of Collingwood's first Pride Parade and the United Nations Human Settlements Program. The Georgian Triangle's Rainbow Club has sought out to have youth involved in Collingwood's first ever Pride Parade. As a hub where youth of multiple backgrounds and talents come to gather, the Youth Centre is an ideal partner in this endeavour, and even more so, the Youth Advisory, whose focus is on bettering the lives of youth in Collingwood. Supporting youth in Collingwood means supporting all individuals, including the LGBTQ2+ community and its youth. The Council looks forward to helping the Georgian Triangle's Rainbow Club to involve youth in this monumentous event for the town. An essential part of shaping the future of our youth is ensuring a livable planet. The younger generation has already made their voices heard and shown their stance on climate change when they chose to participate in a climate strike on September 27, 2019. The job of the advisory is not to only identify issues facing younger Collingwood residents, but also to respond to complaints addressed by them. This council and Mayor Brian Saunderson have already shown great initiative to change the direction of our youth's future by being in alliance with the United Nations and their new program, UN Habitats. Our council looks forward to supporting the community, the town, and its youth to combat climate change by making our community inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable for all of Collingwood's residents. I will now pass it over to Maya, who will talk about some of the ideas for initiatives we have thought of and would like to work towards over the coming future. Thank you.
A little bit shorter. So as Celeste said, my name is Maya, and she also previously introduced the Youth Advisory, so I'll just restate it again for you guys. So the Youth Advisory is a group put together with the intention to address and find solutions that affect Collingwood youth. At this time, there are 3 main enterprises that the advisory has addressed and would like to move forward with. The first would be a continued drug information presentation. After DARE, there's little to no additional information given to students on drugs and drug use. Furthermore, DARE is mostly an attempt at prevention of usage. However, the reality is that at some point in their high school career, students will use or have come into contact with some form of drugs or alcohol. The advisory has acknowledged a need for a follow-up program aimed towards informing students not only of drugs and alcohol and their effects, but also important knowledge to help them react to any emergency situation that they might come across when drug use or underage drinking is involved. Please note that this presentation would be done by selected responsible youth in order to create a connection with the students listening. The intended audience would be grade 9 students and their parents. We have connected the local doctors We have connected with local doctors so far in regards to what should be in this presentation. The assembly would end with an introduction to our Youth Safe Arrival program. So the Youth Safe Arrival program is our second initiative. It is inevitable that there will be parties where underage drinking occurs. The Youth Safe Arrival program ensures that youth are safeguarded and make it home safely from parties where they've been drinking or simply do not feel comfortable in their current situation. A myriad of reasons may prevent a youth from being able to return home, whether it be that their designated driver is no longer sober or they do not have a ride planned. These problems are exacerbated by the remoteness or distance of some areas locally. The Youth Safe Arrival program would be volunteer-based, have cameras in each vehicle to ensure driver and passenger safety, be app-based, have driver and passenger profiles, and require passengers to go directly home to avoid abuse of the program. The third initiative that the council has acknowledged is an app for the town of Collingwood itself. So the following initiative is one that the advisory felt would be beneficial to all Collingwood residents, youth included. The app would allow residents to have any information about the town at their fingertips. The categories and subcategories would be as followed. One would be for bus and transit, trail maps, local news and events, job and volunteer opportunities, wellness resources, important contacts, and a specific subcategory for youth especially. As the town of Collingwood grows, so does its population and the opportunities available to each individual. Many events, services, and opportunities go unused, and they are not properly advertised or simply do not reach the target audience. With all this information contained to one place, it allows residents of Collingwood to reap all the benefits and can boost the economic growth of the town during low tourist seasons by increasing the numbers of people using the attractions available year-round.
Okay, so we'd like to conclude our presentation there. We're in a very unique position at the centre where we work with youth from grade 7 to age 18. All our programming is done in the evening after school, and we see youth from all demographics and all environments in town. So it's a great place to really gauge what is happening with youth in the community and to move forward with those ideas. All of the ideas that were put forward were come up by the girls and the youth on the committee themselves, and then I'm in a unique position to kind of move them forward and kind of flesh them out. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you've got any questions, that'd be great.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. This was a deputation, so it will not open up to the public, but I will open up to council members. Any questions or comments, council? Councillor McLeod.
Through you, Your Worship, are you asking us for anything, or are you just letting us know what you're up to?
We'd like to be in a position to, every 6 months, come back and talk to council, let you guys know what we're doing, what we're working with, and also to kind of solidify our relationship with the town council. So if there are specific initiatives and decisions that are being made that directly are involving youth, they'd like to be heard and consulted.
Thank you.
Councillor Hanlon.
I just want to thank the group for coming tonight. It's wonderful how far the youth advisory, what do you call it? Youth advisory has come. So this, just to remind you, Mr. Mayor, that there's been a bit of an ad hoc committee that I am, I guess, chairing. Yes, that we meet every once in a while, and it was really at the institution of Robert Bernard, who came here talking about youthful cities a year ago. and he strongly recommended we have a youth advisory council. So Lee is also sitting on that committee, and a couple of other people in our community. And so this is the first time that the Youth Advisory Council has come to us now. They've been encouraged by our committee to get organized and come up with issues, and so here they are. So I guess what I would like to know, Mr. Mayor, is how we can move this forward in terms of having someone to get involved with the ideas of this Youth Advisory Council and provide the feedback they need and the input.
And I think that's something we can let the staff to come back maybe at the next council meeting with. There's a number of models that could be pursued. Something like we would have with any resident committee, like the Heritage Committee or BA. There may be a way that we could, you have your own committee, and we don't intend to interfere with that. You've done great work so far, as you've told us. What we might look at doing is having a council member who would sit on that committee and act as a liaison between council and that committee, and help you in your efforts to move forward, but you are your own standalone committee. And based on the list that you've given us, I would imagine you've been in touch with the Georgian Triangle Rainbow Group about the Pride Parade. You're doing a lot of stuff on your own, which is fantastic to see. And it's a wonderful contribution and an important one for our community. So I certainly commend you for that, and we'll look to staff to come back with ways that we could create a relationship with council as you move forward.
Awesome, thank you very much. And in the near future, I'd like to invite everyone to come for a tour of the centre and see what we do there.
I'm coming for a meal.
It's a good day to work.
I've been there many times, and it's a wonderful program you run, and it's evolved over time, and I think it's got itself to a very significant place. So it's fantastic to see Ray Smith's largesse be utilized to the extent that it is. So we all owe him a great debt there, and it's wonderful to see this working forward. So congratulations to all of you. Maya, my apologies, it had Ariane up there. I'll remember that going forward, but thank you very much for coming today.
Awesome, thank you very much.
So that concludes deputations and takes us into staff reports. Item 5.1 T 2020-02, the 2020 fees and service charges. And I'll look to the treasurer.
Through you, Your Worship, this is a standard report that we require on an annual basis, actually, and it is to provide the fees and charges for the services that we do provide to the community. Our normal procedure is to basically provide a listing to department heads of the existing fees that they have provided us with the year before, index them with the CPI at one of the second quarter dates, and have them review it, add any new charges to it that they wish, provide us with the, if they don't like the 2%, provide us with a higher rate or a lower rate, and the finance department then just compiles them and brings them forward in bylaw form for council to review and approve. And that would basically be it, Your Worship. It's covers every charge or every fee that we have for any service. We'll see this also contains the new water and wastewater rates, so it'll be up to date. We prefer, well, I like to just do one bylaw a year, so what we're going to end up with this time around is a bylaw that will come into effect on April the 1st to give our friends at EPCOR time to adjust the format on the hydro bill to cover the humpback billing that we've gone to with the new rates.
Thank you, Marjorie. And just before I open the floor for discussion, can you just give us some context, not including the water and wastewater fees, what percentage of our annual budget do these fees represent?
To you, Your Worship, our overall operating budget for 2020 is $59.9 million. These fees that we're talking about here would approximately raise $3.8 million in fees, or 6% of our gross overall revenues.
Okay, thank you for that. Council, questions or comments for the treasurer? Councilor Doherty.
Thank you very much. I was able to receive a copy of the 2019 fees so that I make some comparisons, and I'm just wondering, perhaps for next year, if we could actually have that included so we can see immediately where the changes in fees may be. Generally, I could see that there were not great increases in any particular area, save and except sewers and drains. I noted that there were some fairly significant increases for some of the services, like flushing, vacuuming laterals, overtime charges, etc. And I was just wondering why that was just that particular department.
All right, I'll look to the Director Slav.
Thank you, through your worship, to Councillor Doherty. So the new fees are based on what we see as our actual costs when we perform these works. So in some cases, when we look back at the work that we have done, there were some instances where we need to raise it more than the 2% that Treasurer Leonard mentioned.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to make some general comments as well. Looking over the Taxicab licensing fees, and I did sort of a very preliminary review of some other municipal bylaws relative to Taxicab licensing. And two things were apparent to me. First, that our fees are, for the initial license, are quite high as compared to other municipalities. And also, there seems to be a move generally among municipalities to reduce those licensing fees, or even to, and to include licensing fees for Uber or other private taxi or private transportation providers. So in my view, if we are to take a look at our licensing fees, and if we are to perhaps do that in concert with the opportunity to license private transportation operators, then we may be able to create a little bit more of a level playing field among that service sector. And the other advantage, in my view, is that we would, by having private operators provide us or apply for a license, they necessarily must provide us with their proof of insurance, proof of licensing, etc. So we are able to protect our residents and visitors to our community even better. I'm just wondering if that is something. Of course, it's too late. I appreciate that it's too late for this year, but I'm hoping that we can have a serious look at that next year, because the landscape for these kinds of services has changed quite dramatically with the implementation of services like Uber and Lyft. And so I think it's time for us to have a look at that as well.
And my understanding is there's actually a staff report in the works, but I'll look to the clerk on that, and it was part of our list, I think, that we received.
Certainly, I know that through your worship, to Councillor Doherty, that there is a number of bylaw enforcement policies and bylaws that they are looking at, including licensing. So that would include licensing, and I believe that is in the queue for this year. Actually, the deputation this evening talking about basically a rideshare program as well that they're looking at, and all of these things get captured in that sort of idea. So we'll make sure that that information is passed along to Director Farr, because it would fall under his area.
Excellent, that's great. The second item that it just occurred to me when I was reviewing some of these rates was the parking rates for Hurontario Street versus other municipal parking lots. And it seemed to me there is a premium. We do charge a slight premium for parking on Hurontario Street. And it seemed to me that perhaps we had an opportunity to increase the premium for parking on Hurontario Street. And I will explain why. I think that there's only upside in doing this because we encourage visitors, business owners, and retail staff to find less expensive parking and in other municipal parking lots and free up spaces on Hurontario Street. That's number one. Number two, of course, it would increase parking revenues and would allow us to consider the implementation of expanded parking as time goes by, because it's appearing that this has become more and more of an issue. And the final advantage is that when it is easy or inexpensive to park on Main Street, the temptation is for visitors to go up and down, or residents to go up and down the street looking for a spot to park. This creates congestion, and it gives the impression of the Main Street as being less cycling and pedestrian friendly than it could be. And I think those of you that have read Jeff Speck's book, The Walkable City, that was one of his strong recommendations for retail cores and traditional main streets, to consider encouraging parking to go off the main street so that it's more of a place for people to meet and walk safely. And so that's another comment that I would like to make. I know that this will probably be something we want to do in consultation with the BIA, but I see, in my view, I see no downside in having a look at this.
Yes, and I'll look to the clerk, but I think that item is on the bundled list as well. So it is something we are looking at, and something, you're correct, I think we need to talk with the BIA. As you know, Councillor Doherty, you've been around this table a long time. The free parking, charge parking is a big issue downtown, so it goes around. But yes, I agree with you, and those are good comments, and I think we have it on the list.
Great, thank you. Those are my comments.
Any other questions, Council? Councillor Coney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple, so I'll just do similar Councillor Doherty. The first thing I'd like to do, please, is echo Councillor Doherty's comments on the need for council to receive the prior years and the existing years side by side, because it was really hard on the eyes to try to line them up and understand some context. So I'll echo that, as well as agreeing, concurring with her parking comments. But as for my first comment, Mr. Mayor, the first thing that caught my eye that I didn't see last year, of course, was the marijuana grow op enforcement fee per property. And we have on there per hour per staff member $100. I didn't know if staff wanted to speak to that a bit, like what triggers us to have to go out in that instance, or how many of these we could anticipate needing to enforce.
I'll look to staff, but it was just legalized in the last year, so that's probably why I didn't find it last year, and maybe which respective staff member would address this? Okay. Vice Chief or Deputy Chief, I guess you're on call for that one, but maybe you can explain the metrics that went into that charge.
We haven't had as many grow-ups in the last year, but probably in the last 10 years, we probably had 24, and where we are trained in hazmat, we're the only authority to go in. The police don't have the authority to go in, so we're the first ones. So we just do it by manpower at the time. Usually it's a minimum of 4 people, and then police have to stand by outside. And then on top of that, we may have to call in other resources through Barrie, and outside of that would be Toronto if it gets too big. But we are the first responder to it.
Well, that's really interesting. So, Mr. Mayor, we were just talking how it just came in legally, but this, then with it just being added now in the past 10 years, 24 responses, I guess in the past, we haven't sort of had a line item to address a fee associated with it?
Well, I'll look to the treasurer, but I think because it's been legalized, the monitoring and bylaw enforcement has become more of an issue, and some of that because Collingwood opted in, we hope to be able to recoup from the province, and maybe the treasurer can give us some of the math there on that. I know some comes through the county as well, but Marjorie, what are you able to assist on this?
To you, Your Worship, I believe it is more of just the fact that it has been legalized, and we realize that we should be charging for it. It's basically one of those things, it slipped through the cracks in the past, and we've caught it, so.
But now funding is available, so.
Yes.
So hopefully we can recoup and charge to recoup as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you so much. Mr. Mayor, my next comment, I had called Clerk Almas earlier today and just offered comment that when it comes to our sidewalk patios, I see that, you know, we charge a one-time installation fee of $212. And then I just offered comment that I was surprised when it came to the annual renewals that we don't charge anything for the administration of that paperwork. So I just shared with her a thought that, you know, that perhaps we have an obligation to try to recover any administrative costs associated with that.
I'll look to the clerk.
Certainly through your worship to Councillor Comey and council and the public. I had an opportunity to do some further background check into that. So we did actually have a fee. Council decided to remove the fee a few years back, and it looks like the process continues to be complex. So we are in the process of reviewing that patio bylaw as well. This will be something that we would definitely need to consult with the BIA. Because I know that they were instrumental in the council decision to remove that annual renewal fee. So that will be coming forward hopefully sometime in the second quarter.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Clerk Almas. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the next couple are related to PRC, and I think it's over to through you to Director Culver. We were just trying to clarify. I had emailed him earlier in the day and said I was surprised. You know, last year we saw round numbers when it came to things like, let's say the public skating. So on our 2020 fee, it says $2.65. Last year it said $3. The public family skate $7.08 versus $7.50. And I was saying I know my daughter rumbles through the change jar before heading over there, and I just wanted to clarify if it is in fact after tax a round number.
Director Culver.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, the reason why it's $2.65 is for the exact reason that Councillor Comey mentioned. $2.65 plus 13% tax comes to $3. Same with the adult, the $7 becomes $7.50.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, and then again, those fees are essentially staying the same. And further that, we touched on the conversation that was focused around affordability. And when it comes to, of course, these fees also include things like our swim lessons. And we touched on the conversation that Director Culver said council could anticipate hopefully sometime this year hearing a little bit more about the PRC master plan and looking towards affordability programs for some of our residents who might not be able to always manage these fees. So I think that's something council will really look forward to. And then through you, Mr. Mayor, the next thing Director Culver and I were kind of going back and forth about were the fees for the docking and launching fees. And I had pointed out to him that, you know, they were mostly staying the same or 2%, but there were some anomalies in there with some increases of 19% and some decreases between 8 and 4% and 2%. Maybe Director Culver can kind of help us out with that.
Director Culver.
Through your worship, so through the conversation with Councillor Comey, we identified that there is one typographical error on the line reflecting the non-resident launching fee. It says $69 in the schedule when it should be $59, which would be an increase of $1 over last year, or roughly 2%, rounded down to the nearest dollar. There are potentially some other rounding errors as the formula went in on that page. So Treasurer Leonard and I have agreed to get together and clean those up before this report comes to council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Comey.
And that concludes it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. I'd like to just get a clarification from Director Culver. My recollection when we were doing the BMA assessment of our facilities, particularly at Centennial Pool, because we do heavily subsidize all of our programs. My understanding was that of the $1.1 million deficit we run annually through Parks and Rec, that as the share of those portions that go to relate to the pool would not be able to keep up. The costs would increase faster than the rate of inflation. So even though we're increasing some of our costs by 2%, we're actually slipping in terms of our overall deficit position. Am I correct in that?
To your worship, I believe generally what you're saying is correct. I don't have that analysis directly in front of me, but I do believe what you're saying is generally correct.
Okay, Any other questions or comments, council? Right, well then, I think I'm looking for a motion then that council receive staff report T 2020-03, no, that's the wrong one. Oh, and my apologies. Before I put the motion on the table, I will ask the public if there's any comments about the report that we've just received. I know I'm looking at you, Matthew, but I'm not singling you out. Don't feel compelled. Okay, all right. Seeing none, then I will look for a motion to put this on the table, and that the staff report T 2020-02 be received, and council enacts and passes a bylaw to establish the 2020 fees and service charges as set out. Can I get a mover and seconder? Councillor McLeod, Councillor Doherty, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Next item on the agenda is item T 2020-03 municipal modernization projects. And Marjorie, just before I open it up for you, my understanding is that this is just an update that we're receiving for information and that the funds have been allocated. Am I correct in that?
To your worship, the vast majority of the funds have been allocated out there. And every day as we go by, there are new things that crop up that could as well fit into the plan for this money, and we have more. We could use more of it than the 595.
Okay, so I will pass it over to you then, Treasurer, to take us through the report then, please.
Thank you, Worship. These funds were provided in March of 2019 by the provincial government, and while they are unconditional funds, they are intended to help modernize service delivery and reduce future costs through investments in projects such as service delivery reviews, development of shared service agreements, and capital investments. And through December, I believe it was December, I received the call, and as well I received the call in January from the province wanting to know how we had used any of the funds that we had been allotted, or what our intentions were in terms of the three main criteria that they wanted: the capital investments in IT, service delivery reviews, or shared service agreements. I provided them with the information that we had discussed in department heads, and when we were dealing with how to arrive at where the funds should be allocated, we based it on the premise of improving our customer service options, minimizing any ongoing future costs, and improving efficiencies and creating a 21st century municipal organization. One thing that all staff has wanted to get underway for a number of years now is to get mobile and web friendly services for our customers out there. And these are all technology related items that we've got in here. But our objectives and desired outcomes were to fully integrate and enable all systems at the town to provide web and mobile enabled services to our citizens, to ensure that the residents of Collingwood have an accurate and consistent experience each time they access our online presence, and to provide a single e-commerce engine to simplify and streamline online customer transactions. So the first item that, and we actually are coming to the testing phase of this piece of software, it's called Virtual City Hall, which is a customer self-serve application that integrates with our general ledger Great Plains financial software. It will also integrate with our job costing work tech systems, and it will provide the ability to have animal licensing for customers to apply, view, update, and pay for their annual licenses. However, we would have to convert. Animal licensing is now done through CityView, which will not integrate with Virtual City Hall, but we used to run animal licenses through Great Plains in the past, so we will be reactivating that. We have business directories, business licensing. You can track your bylaw violations and all of those things. Probably the ones that are most of interest to finance are the eSend integration, which will allow us to send out with the eSend module to actually be like Enbridge and the rest of those big companies by just sending out your invoice directly to your own email. We can, you have the opportunity to come in and look at the system and view your taxes. You can actually see assessments, past tax notices that you have, as long as we've sent them to you by eSend. They'll be available for reference in the past. And that will actually happen as well for utility customers when we do bring the water and wastewater programs in-house. So the approximate cost of that module is $27,250, and as I say, we're well on the way now. We've got it, we're going to roll it out to a few additional staff for testing in-house. We have the eSend module, which is approximately $6,700, and again, is that we will be able to provide the paperless billing for our customers, and that will apply to all of the items that we do bring in. We're looking at some budgeting software, which the current process that we have is it's very labor intensive. It requires a lot of spreadsheets and manual checking and that sort of thing. So we'd like to find a package that would link to our Great Plains General Ledger, as well as to a piece of software called Caseware that we use to prepare our year-end financial statements. And it would be able to provide real-time updates on the website, so people could see where the construction projects are and how far along they are and what the costs are. So that's approximately $25,000 for the initial year, and then it would run at $22,000 per year after that. Again, for our customer service, we're looking at a customer relationship software, which would allow the tracking of customers' complete interaction with the town, from contact to resolution of the problem. We've estimated that the approximate cost for that is $46,000. Procurement software. We're one of the very few municipalities that don't accept electronic bid submissions, and with a very small procurement department, it would be it would assist them greatly and save a great deal of time to have the electronic vendor submissions. And then second phase of it would be to evaluate the RFP bids, provide the checklists and weighting, and then it would be contract administration and vendor performance for the third phase. And overall it would be it's at $16,000 for the purchase of 2 licenses, and then subsequent phases would be implemented when budget funds were available. Customer service and related projects, we have front counter redesign at the town hall, which we hope will work as a model for other areas within the town when we get around to having a consistent look and feel as to how people actually come in and face somebody, and it's the same as if they were in the town hall or at planning or maybe the fire hall too, who knows. Customer service training, as we mentioned in here, not all of the first point of contact events are handled by administrative assistants, customer service ambassadors, or customer service representatives. There are many, many more that occur with frontline staff that really haven't received training on the vision for customer service being developed by the town. We have many summer PRC workers, co-op students, and just staff in general that are more back office staff that don't have a lot of interaction but should be trained on how to interact when they do require it. And we had looked at this at one time before, and at that time it was approximately $50,000, so by having our customer service manager in-house, we should be able to provide or reduce some of those costs in some ways or means. Then the last thing would be the water and wastewater billing, and we couldn't contemplate bringing the billing in-house until we had installed all of the wireless transmitters. And what we have, it's a multi-step process to do this. We're having a lot of trouble with tenant meters and tenant arrears that we need to collect as many of those as possible, but we will be working on that. There are still some other items and testing areas that we can deal with in the meantime. And when we did look at that, it was a conversion cost of between $400,000 and $600,000, and it could be higher than that depending on how much history we would like to bring over to provide reference material for the next water and wastewater rate studies and development charge studies and that sort of thing. And since we kind of put this together, there has been another item that Peggy has brought forward, and it's to do with a backup generator at the water tower. Yeah. And it's roughly a $30,000 cost, and it blew, so it kind of needed to be replaced quickly, but we'll get there. So and those are really our ideas as to what we would like to spend that on to meet the criteria that the ministry has set out.
Thank you, Marjorie. Before I put the motion on the floor, I will look to the audience to see if anyone has comments on the report that we've just received. Seeing none, then I will get this on the floor. So I need a mover and seconder that council receive staff report T2020-03 municipal modernization projects for information purposes. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Questions or comments, Council? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to clarify, when we say we're receiving it for information, and in light of some of the things that I heard the Treasurer say, so this money has been spent. This is just a report saying how we did it, or are we asking for permission, or is the Treasurer asking for permission to spend it? I'm not clear.
My understanding is some of it's in progress, and I don't know that all of it's been spent, but I'll look to either the CAO or Marjorie to answer that question.
To you, Your Worship,
Yep.
The large majority of these items are in the current budget for this year. So instead of using another reserve for that, we will use those funds and retain some reserve money, because again, the judicial inquiry is not leaving us much in those reserve balances at the end of the year, if anything.
And
if I don't mean to interrupt, but the bigger projects, things like when we start working on the water wastewater billing to bring it in-house, we'll need to get quotes on that, and we would come back to council, because they will cost more than the amount of money that we have received. But there's a potential, like the money that was announced at the last council meeting is specifically given to us for a service delivery review, and then they're going to be having other streams of the same modernization funding coming out this year. So we're hoping that they'll focus one on the service delivery, one on the capital assets, one on the shared agreement sections, like one of each of the three sections that they have there.
So to clarify, the money is spent, and this is telling us what we've done or what we're about to do.
Well, I think, as I understood the answer, the money has been budgeted in the budget for this year, and what staff is suggesting is that given there's some fluidity to this funding, because some is being released on an ongoing basis, that some of those monies be applied to these budgeted items so they're not coming out of reserve. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct.
And my second question sort of goes back to the budget, because I know that when we were doing the budget process, there was a list of items that we jettisoned. Are any of these items from that list?
Marjorie, can you answer that, please?
Yes, I can, Your Worship. No.
Thank you.
Councillor Hamlin.
I have a few questions, Mr. Mayor. The first one is, in terms of bringing the wastewater and water billing in-house, why would we consider that? Is there a substantial cost saving, or what would be the reason?
Marjorie.
Through you, your worship, the main reason is customer service. As it is now, the people are paying through EPCOR. The way that the distribution code allows hydro companies to apply payments has created an arrears problem for us. We are running roughly $300,000 worth of water arrears water and wastewater arrears that we can never collect because we don't have the ability to deal directly with those customers. The data is ours, but we have no access to it. We'll bring it in-house so we can handle things the way that they should be handled and provide the customer with the opportunity to actually come in and look at the screens through their online processing in virtual City Hall, see where their standing is. The main problem with these arrears is that it's dealing with tenant meters, and that is something that Peggy and I are going to have to work on to clean out all the tenant meters that are out there. But we will get that done, and it will give us, when it's brought in-house, we will have full control over our large receivable amounts.
And just a follow-up question on that, Mr. Mayor, through you to the treasurer. Will EPCOR then be charging us less for, do they charge us now for that service? And will we then have less of a charge?
Marjorie.
Again, through you, your worship, I believe this year it's going to be approximately $575,000 to process all of the invoices. That cost would come in-house. We have, because we've gone to the wireless, and Peggy's people now are in charge of the maintenance on those transmitters, and we have one water clerk that maintains or checks the fact that the transmitters themselves are working and sees if there are excess usages and all that. We would potentially have 2 additional staff in-house to handle that. We would send the bills out to a print house in Toronto that would have them mailed there, or we can send people up and do the e-send that way.
Okay, so that sounds great. So my sort of overall question is, as I understood it, Mr. Mayor, these funds were provided to the municipalities by the province as a one-time spending to, do great things in their municipality. And I believe I heard our treasurer explain that she's taken items from our budget that we're already financing through our tax rate this year, which I understand, because I also understood her to say, well, this will provide some savings out of our reserve fund for paying for the judicial inquiry. But I had really hoped that council and maybe the residents would have an opportunity to provide some input into what kind of wonderful things we need in town. And even as I sat here today, and this is just off the top of my mind, I was thinking, having heard the presentations from our Youth Advisory Council, maybe contributing something, because that's where the funds will have to come from us, but they are mentioning the Youth Safe Arrival Program and perhaps a Collingwood app. I also made a note here about, wouldn't it be great to have an online portal for council members to get their in-camera packages and so on, and I understand other municipalities do that, and the council members have their own password to get into the site and so on. Anyway, I could sit here all day and think of things, so I just wanted to ask if there would be an opportunity for council and perhaps staff or residents to have input into how some of these funds could be used. I added up what was in the report here and came in at something around $260,000, except for the taking in-house of the water and wastewater billing, which will have the opportunity of saving us, I think I heard $575,000, but we may have to add staff Anyway, all to say, I would like to have more fun with this money and do some things that, other than what's in our budget this year. Is that a possibility? That's my question.
I'll pass that through to the CAO, but I think my understanding is that the money's a bit fluid, and what has been budgeted is already coming out of reserves, so we're looking at paying from one fund to another, so I don't know that it limits the options for us, but I'll look to the CAO.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Hammond. I think those are all valid suggestions for funding. Unfortunately, the money was given with a specific purpose in mind, so any transfer payment to another partner I don't think would qualify, although there might be noteworthy cause. It would be difficult for us to justify transferring any portion of this money outside of the corporation. So I think that sort of was one of the limiting factors we looked at. The other issue is regarding council access to electronic format to get materials. I think that's a noteworthy suggestion and idea, and I think something we should pursue, and we will pursue it. But I think just to follow up on what the Treasurer said, I mean, this fund also enabled us to accelerate some of these initiatives that we were always contemplating, and I think there are three things in my mind that this bundle of projects achieve. One is, and these are consistent, I think, with our strategic plan that we have in place, and also the principles that we articulate in the budget documents that we presented to Council. And the first one is the whole idea of the modernization of the public service in Collingwood and taking us into the 21st century. I think the use of technology is way below where we should be as a corporation, and this will accelerate us getting there. And it will do two things, I think. In addition to enhancing the customer service experience, I think it will also result in greater productivity from staff, because we're using a lot of these software to be able to enhance the way we do business and how quickly we can get things done. And the other one is this whole idea of seamless customer service. One of the things we talked a lot about was using common platforms so that when we're trying to facilitate interdepartmental activities, we can do that without having to worry about interoperability issues, and I think this would allow us to do that. In terms of engaging our residents and the public, I mean, I think if there are ideas on how we can enhance efficiency, we're always open to those ideas, and we're going to look at if there are opportunities for funding those initiatives in the future. But as of now, I think this bundle of projects is worthy of consideration, and some of which we have actually gone ahead and proceed with based on approved strat plan and approved budgetary policies, and we're hoping that we can accelerate these things by trying to add to what we're doing on the technology side. The common customer service experience that the Treasurer mentioned, I think, is a good point, because right now what we have at our front counter, there is no sense of privacy. So if 2 or 3 residents come in, they do transactions, in the public domain, and I'm not suggesting that's necessarily the right way or wrong way to do it, but I think a better way to do it is to ensure that when people come in, they have some sense of privacy, whether they're paying a parking ticket or their tax bill, and we're trying to do some of that by the way we reorganize our front counter. So this is all geared towards frontline customer service and using technology to enhance that experience.
Thank you. Just one comment, Mr. Mayor. I think as I understood the youth presentation, they weren't, in terms of the Collingwood app and their Youth Save Arrival program, they aren't looking to set those up on their own. They would be looking to our town to take these on as initiatives. So I just wanted to leave that thought.
Yeah, through your worship, and I had a bit of fun with the clerk when the presentation was made, because the staff know that I've always wanted a Collingwood app, and I whispered, this is perhaps the time I'm going to get the Collingwood app. So that's something we're pursuing, and I'd love to collaborate with the Youth Council to try and get them to help us build an app. I think that makes a lot of sense, and if we can, I've always talked about a sort of a major hacking session where we bring young people in a room and have them bring their ideas to the table to try and develop technology to help us deliver better customer service. So the app is on our mind, and I think it would be a great opportunity to collaborate with the Youth Council to work on the app under the guidance of our information technology team at Town Hall. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Sanderson. Just a quick comment and then a question for you to the treasurer. The comment is, I love the report. I think, to you to correct me on this, that this perfectly encapsulates the direction that the CAO has been taking, staff and council, since we took office. Is that the right word? Thank you. Quick question for you to Marjorie is, there's a couple ones in here that make reference to under budgeting software. It says approximate 25,000 in year one and then 22,000 per year after that. Excuse my voice. And under front counter redesign, 125 for 2020 and 100,000 for 2021. And I just want to know, is this a whole, it's a math question, is it all included in the 595? Are we going to be in a position next year's budget to go, well, you kind of have to approve that? That was part of.
Through you, Your Worship, the extra $22,000 annually in terms of support or licensing fees for the budgeting software, I would anticipate that we can, because we've only opted for a contract financial analyst this year to get us through a larger portion of the backlog of work that we have, we should be able to make that $22,000 up. That's my assumption on that. And the total, when you include it, it comes out actually to be, if we were including the 600,000 for the water wastewater transformation, the whole amount would be roughly $1 million that we have there. So we know that we won't be able to get all of that done because we only had 595 to start with. But as I say, I'm hoping that we can get some further modernization funding through other programs that phases of the application process that they have. And plus any money that we received or could apply to the water wastewater transfer, we could then have in the, retain in the water and the wastewater reserve funds for the expansions of the treatment plants that we have in the near future.
Yeah, that's the answer I was hoping for. Thank you.
So any comments? Seeing none, we have the motion on the table, and that is to council receive staff report 2020-3 municipal modernization projects for information purposes. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Item 5.3, T 2020-04 council remuneration. Marjorie, are you on this one too? And Clerk Almas, so we will going to the control podium. Floor is yours, Sarah.
Thank you through your worship to members of council and the public. I'm going to provide a brief overview of our report. So this is a joint report between the Treasury Department and Clerk's Department. This is one of the first examples of our bundled initiative. As it is a requirement, Marjorie will go over the municipal act requirements and review your remuneration component of it, and I'll get into the proposed expense policy for council's consideration.
Thank you. So the remuneration statement is another one of the housekeeping items that we have to report on under Section 284(1) of the Municipal Act. We have to provide an annual statement on or before March 31st, and I really like cutting it close. And paid, and it's actually the key to that word line there is paid. If you submit your December expenses in January, you didn't get paid for them in December, so they won't be on that report. They'll come in next year. Expenses of a member of the council or any other body, including a local board to which the member has been appointed in council or on which the member holds office by virtue of being a member of council, has to be recorded on the report as well. We have only one of those. Expenses of each person other than a member of council appointed by the municipality to serve as a member of any body, including a local board, in respect of his or her service as a member of the body. And that always refers to the Committee of Adjustment. So the next slide. This year, we provided a little bit more information on it. In the past, we have really only provided the total remuneration, which would be salary and special meetings combined. We would have shown health premiums, CPP, EHT travel, all under professional develops. So we would have just had 3 columns on there. This year, we had media requests for amounts of payment for special meetings. So we decided to include that column this year. And again, for the actual professional development accounts, we decided to split out the health premiums and the CPP-HT that we pay on our remuneration, because it really isn't your professional development or discretionary accounts. So we've moved them out so you can actually see the amounts that you spend on going to conferences and those other things like that. We have always provided Councillor Jeffrey with a separate line for FCM, and this year we'll be having a similar one for Councillor Doherty for the AMO expenses. And our Committee of Adjustment that gets paid by the meeting are shown on that report. And Councillor McLeod is the only one that has been appointed to an outside board that reimburses or pays for what it is, and it's travel and per diems or payment for a daily lunch. And that would be all I have to present.
So I have the remainder, and this actually arose during the questions that were raised in the month of February about per diems and what's the use of per diems and what's a special meeting. So we thought rather than looking at an expense policy later in the year, that we might as well consolidate the entire guidelines, policy parameters, expectations that we're looking at, so council has a full understanding of what is anticipated. So this policy, again, is something that we put together. We looked at a random number of expense policies. We've looked at issues that we have filed and noted that have come up in the past. We've also had actually our integrity commissioners who are here tonight, as they would like to have, if we provide them with any draft policy and procedure. They reviewed this policy and provided their feedback, which has been incorporated into the proposed document for your consideration. So the policy itself is intended to provide members with the flexibility to allocate resources in the most efficient way to meet their own particular requirements. It clarifies these processes that members use to administer their budgets by simplifying and outlining the rules, recognizes members' accountability for managing town resources allocated to them, and also sets the spirit and standards for staff to adhere to. As this is, this flows into the HR policies, rather than waiting and putting this report off, we decided to discuss it at department heads, and department heads have an understanding too that this is the same standards that we'd be adhering to as well. So the expense policy relates to the professional development and discretionary expense account, which is intended to provide council with resources to administer activities to support their role, conduct meetings and communicate with their constituents and other stakeholders, maintain connection with their constituents at events, and pursue professional development opportunities. So the principles that we identified within this policy are quite comprehensive. They look at the integrity of council, accountability, transparency, and flexibilities and limits. So the integrity of council. Council, as a decision-making body for the town, has policy requirements that are distinct from administration. The integrity of town council as a whole and as an individual, members must be protected. The interest of council as a whole takes precedence over the personal interest of individual members of council, and it is from time to time necessary that members expend discretionary funds to support their role. So there is an expectation that members use this money for their municipal official capacities. Accountability. Members are stewards of town resources and are ultimately accountable to the public and their constituents for the type and level of expertise they incur. Members' expenses should be reasonable and reflect what the public expects of an elected official. We talk about the transparency components. The public has the right to know how public funds are allocated to members and how that money is spent. The public's right to members' expense information should be balanced against the need to protect privacy and personal information to allow for proper accounting and reconciliation of those expenses. And the principle that revolves around the flexibility and limits includes members, they do need the flexibility to perform the roles and operate their offices and pursue their public interests. Members engage their communities differently, and expenditures must not conflict with the rules set out in other legislation and policies, including our election related resources policy. And if we go to our next slide, so the budget allocation. The budget amounts that were set for the past year as identified in the report. The mayor was 2,000, the deputy mayor was 5,000, council members are 4,000. The mayor's is slightly lower because the mayor has a budget that is within the county. And is there any additional comment?
We, through you, your worship, we provide the mayor with a smaller professional development at $2,000 because he does have the ability to use the county remuneration there. But we do provide him with $7,000 for travel and business-related expenses.
Perfect. The area of per diems. So per diems are to cover lost wages or cost of living type of expenses. Previously we provided an hourly amount. We're looking at, it seems to be a best practice across the province to actually divide it between half and full day per diem. So we're saying anything that's 4 hours plus would be a full day per diem. It is the individual's responsibility to submit their per diem request on the form that we've appended to our policy. Clerk services will submit a quarterly per diem requisition form on behalf of council for all additional council and standing committee meetings that are required. And it's members, if the member's budget is overspent as a result of the extra meetings, that additional budget would be allocated from the corporate administration budget and not from within your own professional development accounts. And the rates that we're looking at are $70 for half day and $140 for a full day. Any over expenditures are the personal responsibilities of each member and to be paid by the member. There's no carryover of deficits or surpluses from one year to the next. And this is particularly important in an election year. Also understanding that during an election year, if you're allocated $4,000 within this budget, that you would be, you couldn't spend more than 11/12 of that budget amount. If there are extenuating circumstances, the mayor and CAO shall have the authority to permit any over expenditure from the professional development and discretionary expenses account, with the amount to be allocated from an appropriate account up to 15%. Above that limit requires council approval. Regardless if it is lower within that as 1 to 15%, and the mayor and the CAO feel that it should be a decision of council, council always maintains the authority to make that decision. Members' claims for expenses must follow basic accounting and audit principles, and those guidelines are attached. Our next slide speaks to the public disclosure piece that we are proposing. So in the spirit of accountability and transparency, the individual expenses for members of council will be publicly disclosed on our website, and we're looking at a quarterly basis and based right now on our resources, and if we're able to post them any sooner, I know some municipalities are looking at monthly, we will endeavor and strive to do so. The conditions for the public disclosure include, we're asking that within your expenses, if there's hospitality that's offered by members, that the member actually identifies the business purpose and the date of that meeting expense, and an itemized receipt, including items consumed in the total and participants attending the meeting. special events that are attended by members. We're looking to have an understanding of the type of event, the date, the location, and individuals attending with the member, and of course the receipts. And with travel, identify where the meeting was held and the purpose of the meeting. And we're also looking at having members who undertake town-funded travel to provide verbal update or a brief written submission regarding their experience and knowledge that they've gained at the conference, workshop, training session that they attended at the appropriate standing committee. Lastly, I will go into the expense guidelines. Right now, actually, we have it noted in there as eligible expense guidelines, but truly it's an expense guidelines because some of them we provide varying policy requirements around. So I'll touch on them. So air travel. So obviously, with the principles of you're using tax and public money, that you're looking at economy class. We're looking at if you're submitting your expenses, that we receive the receipts for those. Charges for toll roads. So we're looking that that these would actually be permitted. There is some discrepancy amongst various municipalities on whether toll roads should be permitted or not. In review of this at the department level, we felt that this, if it was, since it doesn't happen very frequently, would be something that we would consider reimbursable. Communication material, self-explanatory. Again, we're looking for those communications pieces to be held within the boundary. Hotel accommodations, we obviously want you to use your common sense and think of the most economical choices when you're undertaking your travel and accommodation. The office expenses that would be eligible include business cards, printer paper, printer cartridges, and stationery. Right now, the town, I believe, does provide the business cards actually through the corporate administration account. Parking, transit, and valet costs, again, pretty self-explanatory. Private vehicles may be used for town-related business purposes, and users will be compensated at the town's established rate. If you use rail, you must again submit your receipts. Vehicle rentals will only be permitted on circumstances where shuttle bus service to conference locations is not provided, and appropriate insurance must be secured. Spousal expenses are not allowed. Any additional fees as a result of a spouse or significant other attending a conference shall be paid by the member. Taxis may be used for local transit, airport service, or where private vehicles are unavailable. A receipt again should be obtained. And telephone expenses, as you're aware that your telephone expenses do come out of your professional development account, and only costs associated with town-related businesses will be reimbursed. Home internet is not reimbursable. And as a conclusion to this, if individuals do want to have extended stays or upgrades to any of these services, it's their personal responsibility to pay. And lastly, we include a standard operating procedure regarding the clerk's support to all members of council when you're undertaking your duties. So as you're aware, we have Jenny Haynes, who's our very competent administrative assistant, and she will help assist. Everybody is responsible to let Jenny know if you're interested in pursuing a registration or looking for accommodations for any conferences or workshops you're attending. You're welcome to undertake that process on your own, again, submitting the necessary receipts that you need to, but we're wanting to ensure that any cancellations are actually the member's responsibility. So once, if the town undertakes doing the registration process for you, you'll be provided with a calendar request with any cancellation details, but it's your obligation, and knowing that if you don't attend, if you go over your budget, that it is your obligation to pay that back to the town. And basically, that's our presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. So before I get the motion on the floor, I will look to the audience to see if there's anyone that has questions or comments about the report we just received. Seeing none, I will get the motion on the floor, and the motion is that staff report T2020-4 and the 2019 statement of remuneration paid to council and appointed board members be received for information. And further, that council approve the professional development and discretionary expense account policy CL 2020-1 as attached here too. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Madigan, seconded by Councillor Hamlin. Council questions or comments? Councillor MacLeod.
Your Worship, I wonder if I might move an amendment that these two pieces of this motion be severed so that we can have a conversation regarding the staff report and a separate conversation regarding the policy that is proposed.
Absolutely, you can request that unilaterally, so we don't need a motion, so I will do that. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
We'll separate those. So we will deal first then with the council, the staff report T 2020-4 and the statement, 2019 statement of remuneration paid to council and appointed board members be received for information. Any questions or comments on that particular item then before I call it? Councillor McLeod.
So I would like to, let me think about how I want to word this. I would like this report to be a bit more fulsome. I would like more of a fleshed out report on what is included in the report, in the expenses put forward by this council in the last year. I've received my individual report from the treasurer, and I must confess that I wasn't aware that I had attended the things that I had attended or which ones they were. I know that I went to 2 things for the AMO and so on and so forth, but I'm just not as clear as I would like to be on where the money that our taxpayers spent on us has gone. And so I wonder if there's a way that we can get a more fulsome report rather than the one that we have. And I'd be, I mean, I don't know how long that might take, but I would be willing to wait.
I'm gonna look to the clerk. The policy is a separate item, but if there's a way that we can, I don't know if we need a motion to amend, or if there's a way that we can come back at the council meeting with slightly different wording. How would you like to proceed with that?
Certainly, through your worship to Councillor McLeod, I guess the first question is are you looking for the more fulsome report for council's approval before March 31st of this year, or are you talking in the future?
For this year, yeah.
Okay, then we'll need to get a motion to amend.
Okay.
Okay.
So I move that we amend this portion of the report, please.
Okay, and the maybe if you want to flesh out the substance thing, I guess is what I'm looking at. And the CAO.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any concerns. I guess it's the will of council. The only one thing I would add is if we have a requirement to make a submission on a statement of remuneration by March the 31st, and I think that's severable, and I don't think that's what you're sort of expecting from us. But that's a statutory obligation that we have to comply with, and that's what's in the first or second page of the slide deck. So I don't think that would impact on what you're requesting, but I just wanted to keep that in mind as you debate how we proceed.
Okay.
Marjorie, you want?
Thank you, Mr. CEO. What we intend to do is all the councillors did receive a detailed by-month list of where their expenses were. And when we want council to, the thought was we would have them accept the remuneration statement. And then we would, when we post it on the web, we would post the package that has each individual councillor's expenditures in it. So we'd have the overall and then the details behind it. With that.
So just if I can get clarification between the two. So what I understood the both staff to say is that the statutory requirement just requires the global numbers. And what you would like to see, I think, for public transparency issues, as that the statement that gets posted has more detail. And I don't know that we're at odds here. I think what the CEO and treasurer are suggesting is we just comply with our statutory requirements within the timeline, but that we're looking at a more fulsome disclosure that would be posted publicly.
Correct.
Okay. So does that require a motion to amend?
Sorry, through your worship
Yeah.
to the treasurer, can this report be amended and those be an appendix to the report when it comes to council on the 16th?
Just for the public disclosure part, I don't think we're concerned about the statutory disclosure. We're just trying to make sure, if I understand the request, that when it goes public, this information goes public, it be more detailed than what's going to go to the government.
To you, your worship, yes, we can append this to the report that is in the staff report. if that's
For
the
public
council.
disclosure, yes.
Disclosure, yeah, that's what council.
Yeah, I mean, I want as much detail. My request would be to include as much detail as possible, and I'm hesitant to use the word to the penny, but I do have a Scottish name. So I would like, I feel a responsibility to our taxpayers. If I spent $52 on a dinner when I was at the AMO in Ottawa, I believe that I should be able to explain that to my constituents, and I'm cool with doing that. And I think all the rest of the people around this table can do the same thing. Even if, I don't know, post receipts, I don't know.
I'm wondering if the wording might be something like the following, that the disclosure for the statutory requirement be as presented, but that the disclosure for the public be more detailed. Okay. So what the clerk has suggested is that the individual statements we all received be appended to the report and made public.
Yes.
And so if that's satisfactory to you, I need a seconder for that. Councillor Coney, and is that?
Well, yes and no. The report that I received about my own expenses is not completely clear to me how that all went down. So AMO conference was listed several times, accommodations was listed several times in different ways, and I want to be able to say this was that date, this was that meal, this was that drive. I want that to be just so very clear to the public what we are spending our money on as councillors, their money on as councillors.
Okay, right, so I guess I'll look to the treasurer. Marjorie, is that doable? That's the first question.
To your worship, again, we would have to come back up to town hall and pull all of the individual expenses, reports that are there, and make sure that we've gotten deposit on AMO accommodations. It would not, we're in the midst of year end, it would not be ready for the 16th or perhaps the 24th to go. So if we can get the short form one there done, then we can work on this. And as I say, it's because we're also, some of us are moving back to town hall, so there's some disruptions going on. It might not be as simple as we think.
Okay, but I think we've got it to a place where we're saying we're good with the numbers for the statutory disclosure. So the March 31 deadline's not such an issue, but what we would like to do is make a more fulsome, itemized disclosure for the public when those numbers get posted.
We can only try our best. I mean, hopefully we would have it done by the end of March, so it could go out there, but.
CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is an important piece of information that that needs to be disclosed, and I think we need to get it right. And I think we need to work with individual members of council to make sure that whatever information is posted online is accurate and reflect their understanding of their expenses. So I don't have any difficulties with us posting the global numbers to meet our statutory requirement, but I think if we get into the detailed itemized account, then we should do that in consultation with the members of council to make sure that the numbers are verifiable and that it does reflect their understanding of what the expenses are. Because I think if we post numbers that there is any discrepancy with, I think that would probably be much more challenging than waiting a few weeks to make sure that the numbers do reflect council's understanding of what their expenses are.
So I agree with the CAO. I think this information, and Councillor McLeod, that this information is critical and it's important to be detailed and accurate. So it puts a positive obligation on each of the council members, as it's been framed and put on the floor, to make sure that they work with the Treasury Department to make sure that the information that's going to get posted is accurate. So I think that's where we're headed. And Councillor Berman, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and I think I'm on the same page. Just wanted a little more detail. So I understand now that March 31st is the deadline to get the numbers that we have in front of us in, but it's not the deadline. We can take as long as it takes to get the whatever we decide the most accurate numbers are out to the public. And as you said, that just takes time for you to put that stuff together. I got lucky because I'd been looking for a couple of weeks and couldn't find it, and today I found all the stuff that the town had given me. So it has my page with my mileage claim, my hotel bill, and photocopies of all the receipts that I turned in. And I agree with what Councillor McLeod was saying, is that if, I know you can't see it, Scoop, but if the public saw what's getting submitted and what I submitted, they're in two completely different languages and the numbers don't add up. And I'm starting to understand why that is. I do believe, and I think this is where the CAO is going, but I stand to be corrected. I do think that the public has a right to know how much my hotel cost. I'm not sure they have a right to know which hotel, but that's up to you guys. I think they have a right to know that I spent $49.26 on dinner. I'm not sure you could argue whether they deserve to know or they get to know what restaurant. I don't really care, but I do think that the public has a right to know every number in here.
If I may, Your Worship?
Yes.
Just to reassure every member of council, anything that the public wishes to see in terms of invoices or cash receipts, they have a right to see it and we do provide it, if asked.
Yes, I get that, and I think that a couple people in the room will remember I did file an FOI back in 2013 and got the exact receipts. I think what I'm talking about more is I don't want them to FOI it. If we were to go along the lines that I think everybody's been talking about and say you're going to submit this on March 31st, but is it possible by May 31st to have what we're talking about up on the town website? Is that something we could consider an add-on, maybe to Councillor McLeod's amendment? Marjorie? It's just sort of a time on it.
If that's the wish of council, yes.
Okay, and so I've been speaking with the clerk. So the motion here is actually just to receive the information. So I think probably what we should do is proceed on receiving for information, and then I'll invite you under other business, Councillor McLeod, to bring your motion.
Okay.
And we'll get it on the table, and then it'll be up on the next council meeting, which will be the 16th or something, right? Okay? So then, having said that, unless there's any other comments, bless you. You're allergic to anyway, we'll call the vote then. Oh, unless there's any other comments on the first aspect, because we've severed the two. That the staff report T 2020-4, that the 2019 statement of remuneration paid to council and appointed board members be received for information. Are there any other comments on that? Seeing none, then I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. And then the second portion now is, and further, that council approve the professional development and discretionary expenses account policy CL 2020-1 as attached here too. Questions or comments, council? Councilor McLeod.
I would like to ask that we have an amendment to that report. To a particular part, I want to discuss the expense policy on page 8 of the report, wherein it is discussed about the 15% discretion that is allowed. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through while I try and find it here. 15% discretionary overage, I think is the word I'm looking for. And I would like to have that taken out of the report. I would like to amend it to take that particular provision out. I think that if our expenses for councillors at any rate are $4,000, that if we're going to spend $600 more than $4,000, that may be, I would rather that council make that decision rather. No offense to the present company. However, I think that I'd like to take that off the mayor and CAO's plate.
And I'll look to the clerk just to comment on that.
Certainly, this was an area that the integrity commissioners did focus on. They're the ones that put in the 15% amount as well. But all of this policy is all put forward for council's
input. Okay, so I will look for a seconder on the amendment then. Councillor Comey, questions or comments on the amendment? Councillor Doherty.
Just in my own opinion, I'm not sure that I would support having that 15% clause removed, just because when we book or when accommodations or meetings are booked for us, we often in our minds think of it at net and not with taxes. And so I can see at the end of the year that there might be some overage just because we, when we were planning, didn't take into account the addition of taxes. And I guess the other thing is staff have a lot to do, and so to ask them to account for 15% or less of our expenses, every single one of us, I think that's it's a lot of work and not necessary, because all of this is going to be a matter of public record anyway.
We'll get to it, but just so I'm clear here, what I understand the amendment to be is that you're saying that any overage has to be approved by council and doesn't go through the CAO and mayor.
Correct.
So anybody who has any overage, it comes before all of council.
Which is not to say that I would suggest that it be denied.
No, I
The
understand
suggestion is that who approves it is the
It's a
council.
council decision.
Yes.
And I'm fine with that. So just, I guess I had trouble following your comment, Councilor Doherty, maybe you can.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to take some work off council when it comes to numbers that are substantially less than our total budget, so 15% or less. Every single one of us goes over by $1, and that entire budget has to be reviewed and reapproved either by staff or by council. It just seems to me to be a lot of additional work, and so my thought is I'm perfectly happy to leave with that little bit of wiggle room.
Okay. So what you're saying is you don't have a problem with the mayor and CAO approving differences up to 15% overages. So what we're looking at here is the ability, if someone exceeds their budget by by less than 15%, then it can be approved by the CEO and the mayor. And what Councillor McLeod has said is that she would prefer it be done by council. So that's the amendment on the table. Okay, I've got your point. Deputy Mayor, you got your hand up? No, okay. Councillor Berman.
I didn't know until now that we had that option. I think Councillor Mangan and I could have picked some nice restaurants when we were in Ottawa.
This is part of the proposed policy. So prior to now, that has not been in there.
Okay. I lean towards what Councillor McLeod's saying. I wonder if it isn't possible just to reduce the number to like 5%. I mean, 15% is a big number. We're elected officials that are entrusted with public funds. I think if we can't figure out what we're spending within 15%, that's on us. So I disagree, I think, with where Councillor Doherty's going. I'm more inclined to go there. Just, I would be open to maybe not eliminating it, but lowering it to maybe 5% so that it gets the few bucks through. But given the choice, I'm going to go that direction.
Okay, well, let's do this. I'll call the vote on the First Amendment, and if that is not successful, then it's on the floor for others to propose other amendments and so forth. So right now, my understanding is 15% would generally be around $600 range on a $4,000 expense budget. So it is not insignificant, I guess, in terms of all of this. Councillor Hamlin, you've pulled your microphone forward.
Really observant, Mr. Mayor. I hadn't really thought about this till we've had this discussion of 15%, but I believe the policy has been, until this, document is approved, that there really wasn't any policy about overages. And so this is a big step to say if council spends up to 15% over the $4,000 budget, they go to the mayor and CAO, and if it's over 15%, it has to go to council. To me, this is, I agree with Councillor Doherty, it's really de minimis to bring all this to council for a couple $100 or, anyway, I would speak in favor of not having to come to council until we're over 15% of the budget.
Okay, CAO want to comment on that?
I mean, I think the intention of this policy was simply to try and relieve council of the burden of approving a budget that has an overage of $1 or $2 or $3 or 1% and 2%. The intention, I mean, the norm is not to continuously approve overage of 15%, that rarely occurs, but to give staff some ability to be able to have that flexibility if there is an overage, rather than preparing a report and coming to council and seek approval for that overage, that staff will go ahead and approve it. The numbers, are significant, but in the grand scheme of things, given the other delegated authority the staff have regarding financial authority, I think this is a reasonable request.
I'm not sure, did I get a seconder? I'm sorry, and if you did, remind me. You said Councillor Comey seconded. Okay. Unless there's any other comments, and I will call the vote on the amendment, which is that any overage come back to council, as I understand the amendment. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So unless there's any other comments, then I will call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? And before I go to the main motion, are there any other amendments? Councillor Brown? Sure. Go ahead, Councillor Brown.
I'll suggest 5%. I think we do, in the cases we've talked about, we do approve Councillor Jeffrey's budget for FCM. We approve Councillor Doherty's for AMO now. So it is, the CAO is right. I mean, in a $90 million budget, $600 isn't a lot, but to the public, I'm not comfortable that we just spend 15% more than what we've told them we're going to spend without being held accountable.
Okay.
So I would suggest 5%.
All right. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Councillor McLeod. So unless there's any other comments, I will call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? And so we're back to the original motion. And I guess before I call the vote on the original motion, Councillor Hamlin?
Yes, on the original, I have a few questions about the policy.
Sure, go ahead.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the change to, I guess what we're talking about is us getting paid for special meetings at a per diem rate. And these, as I understand it, and this is my first question on this, these are the meetings that staff call that council is required to attend? Is that what we're talking about for these per diem rates?
I'll look to the clerk.
That's one component, through your worship, that is one component, but it also includes if you're registered for a conference, you can claim a per diem as well.
Okay, well, so I can just talk about the part that relates to the meetings we have to attend. My concern is, Mr. Mayor, that the attendance at these meetings and the calling of these meetings are out of our control. Yet they will count towards our budget of $4,000. And that if we happen to go to the EMO conference and one other conference and buy a printer cartridge and we attend all the meetings, we may have to pay money back for attending these meetings. That's what I read. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
No, I don't think it is. I'll let the clerk respond, but I think the special meetings of council are a separate item.
So certainly through your worship to Councillor Comey, in discussions when we were reviewing this policy, we had indicated that initially it would come out of accounts, your professional development account. If you go over and above your $4,000 as a result of a special meeting, then we would remove that extra and allocate it out of the corporate administration budget. So that would not put you over.
So again, Mr. Mayor, I just want to drill down into this a little bit because as I can see, having been here 1 year, there's some encouragement to attend the AMO conference, which is an annual event where a lot of councillors go from across the province. It's a great educational opportunity and so on. But for sure, that's a couple of $1,000s for someone to attend. And if we want to attend any other workshops or so on, most of them are in Toronto, so there's some cost involved there.
So we, you know, for myself, I'm interested in being educated, and I'm gonna come back to that later. But what do we do if we've had, I don't know, enough special meetings that we're into the last part of the year and all of a sudden, we can't attend any educational workshops, and so I think where I'm coming to now that I'm talking out loud, sorry, that I would like to remove from our $4,000 budget, and this would be my motion, the monies that we get paid to attend special meetings that are called by staff.
Okay, and before I get a seconder, I'm just gonna get a clarification, because I think as understood, the clerk, if you maxed out your $4,000 expenditure, and as in the case in this year, there were $656 if you attended all the special meetings, and you came to $4,665, would that be considered an overage, or would it be removed because the special meetings were the amount above the 4,000?
The amount would be removed. So at the end of the year, if you're at $3,800 and you want to attend a conference that's $500, but we've had $600 worth of special meetings, we would not make you go over that $4,000 amount. That amount would be taken out from the per diems that were paid for special meetings and put into the corporate administration budget.
And Mark, the treasurer wants to get in on this, so I will look to her.
Through you, Your Worship, when we budget your salary lines in the mayor's budget and the members of council budget, we always budget payment for 10 special meetings in that salary. So when you look at your budgeted salary amounts, they would all be an additional 10 meetings on it because we don't know. So there is a cushion there. So if it's a special meeting, it doesn't go to your professional development.
Okay, so I understand that, and in that case, Mr. Mayor, I would ask if this report can be amended to make that clear so that the policy is just a little clearer in that regard.
Okay, I'll look to the clerk, I think that can be done.
Thank you. And my second question is, in terms of the principles as to how the policy should be interpreted, I was wondering if one of them should be education of members. Because to my mind, as counselors, we are dealing increasingly with complex issues and continually changing requirements. And I know, Mr. Mayor, you share this feeling because you've spoken yourself at this table about this, but that we should be encouraged to be attending educational matters or workshops or whatever, so that we are able to make the most informed decisions we can while sitting at this table. So I wanted to ask whether it would be appropriate to add that as one of the principles behind how this policy should be interpreted, that, the education component. And through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps to our.
So maybe you could just take it to the specific version you're referring to.
So it's at the beginning of the report. At page 6 of the report, there's a policy overview. And then it says this, the following about halfway down, the following principles should be applied when interpreting this policy. A, integrity of counsel, B, accountability, C, transparency, D, flexibility and limits. And I'm suggesting we have some wording around E, perhaps, that would be education and the importance of education to our individual council members, because the policy is towards professional development, which is the education component, and discretionary expenses, but there's not very much in here about the education component.
I think that can be done. I think it's consistent with the terms of the Municipal Act, so I guess clerk, you can insert some wording to reinforce that amendment. All right, then I will look for a seconder for that. Councillor Doherty, Councillor Berman, you have your hand up.
I think I was going to say basically what you were going to say, and even more than the Municipal Act, it's much more specific in our code of conduct as well.
So we can retread it.
Yeah, redundant, but I'm fine with it.
Okay. Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we're getting a little belabored here, but we'll offer a comment on the education that I've shared with Clerk Almas before, which is I recognize it's in the code of conduct. I think it's an important thing to add, but I think if it comes under expenses, it's worthwhile to add that councillors are encouraged to also pursue webinars and a number of free educational components that are available. And I say that having taken a number of free webinars that were very informative. So there doesn't always have to be a cost associated with education or travel.
All right, so unless there's any other comments, Councillor Byrne?
I think that's a great idea. What Councillor Comey said, and I apologize if you've been doing this already, but maybe when you find good ones, you could send the links out to share with us.
Got it, absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm gonna call the vote then on the amendment. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. So we're back to the main motion again. Seeing no other comments, and I do have a question for Councillor Conley.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I was waiting patiently with a couple questions, please, with regard to the policy. One, I very much like it. I think it's very thorough and welcomed. I do have a question though, and I apologize if I missed it. Is there a time limit between when an expense is occurred and when it must be submitted? Because I believe when it comes to gifting, there's something like within 60 days, a councillor should submit notice that they received a ticket to something. Is that also true when it comes to expenses?
Sorry, I just to flip through, I believe that we've actually provided 90 days. But I don't know if the treasurer, again, this would be an accounting principle.
I might have missed it. I apologize if it is there.
Through you, your worship, my only requirement is that I have your, all of your 2020 receipts or requests in by the end of December 2020 to get them all within the 1 year.
Okay, and I guess what flows from that is if you haven't submitted receipts, then they wouldn't come out in quarterly reports if we're doing quarterly reports, but it would certainly be reflected in your annual statement. Okay. Oh, and it does say 90 days, the clerk has told me it says 90 days. What page? Page 9, about 2/3 of the way down.
Appreciate that, thank you. Another question, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to offer, and it ties into Councillor McLeod earlier when we were going into great detail about how the reports will be presented, and it happens to be on page 9, public disclosure. The reports may be broken down into a series of categories for ease of reference. It sounds as though around this table tonight, we're saying we'd very much like them to most definitely be broken down into a series of categories for ease of reference. Not trying to be persnickety on the wording, but it seems as though we just spent a lot of time going around about it. Maybe we just need to say reports will be broken down into a series of categories for ease of reference.
Sorry, that was changed to say broken down into categories, but the alternative to that is that it wouldn't be categories at all, it would be the entire verbatim itemized matter.
Okay, all right, that's fine, and I think that was all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, then.
Yeah, sorry, Your Worship, I was going to say that perhaps what we should do is bring a template to the next council meeting, and so, you know, members have a common understanding of what the template would look like. And,
yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Are there any other comments then before I call a vote? The one question I did have is that I'd like to, so for my own circumstances, I sit on the Great Lakes Cities Initiative, and that's a fairly significant expense. It's like being on the FCN or Councillor Doherty's AMO, and so I'm wondering if there's a way, and this may go back to the last matter, but I guess I'd like to see a way that would be accounted for separately, because I don't want, in the context of this year, certainly with the Catano trip, I was over budget. Those things I think they were approved by council, both of them, but I think they're integral parts. So I'd like to see moving forward a way that we could either break those out as separate line items, or make sure that it's accounted for, because if we don't break them out individually, I will continue to go over budget, and I don't think that's appropriate. I think I should be living within my means, and if I'm doing something on top of my everyday duties, then I think they should be accounted for separately. So I'd like to see that, if we could.
Thank you. So, I mean, the clerk and the treasurer and I had a discussion about this, and I think this goes beyond just the mayor. I think if a member of council is expected to undertake a one-time extraordinary expense, that expense should be reflected outside of their budgetary constraint. So, for example, Councillor Jeffrey is at FCM, and the expenses associated with that is treated as a separate line item, as it should. And I think similarly, if there is a international travel or a special conference that a member of council or the mayor would like to attend, or the deputy mayor, I think the recommendation would be that that item comes to council for approval and a budget associated with that item be allocated at that time.
Thank you, that's what I was looking for. All right, and I don't know that I need to bring a motion on any that part. And, okay, well then I'm going to pass the chair position to the deputy mayor, and I would move an amendment that any separate or extraordinary expenditures in the calendar year be brought before council and approved, and that a separate budget be created for any member of council related to that specific item.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. You've captured that, Clerk Loomis? Okay. Do I have a seconder before I open up? Councillor Madigan, are there any questions? Councillor Doherty?
Thank you. And I just would like to make the comment that really we're already doing that. We're adding a separate budget for items like Councillor Jeffrey and FCM and myself with the AMO Waste Management Task Force. Why could we not do that for you, for the Great Lakes Mayors initiatives as an example? And then we don't really need to make any further amendments to this policy because we're already doing it. That's just my thought.
Well, it's a valid comment, but I guess if we don't have that capacity in there, I think it makes sense to put it in there moving forward so that it would apply to myself and any other member of council, and it's there, and if it's codifying what's already been done in your circumstance and Councillor Jeffrey's circumstance, then I think it makes sense to have it in there for everyone's benefit.
Councillor Doherty?
Sure.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. Those in favor? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Back to you, sorry.
And so then we'll go out back to the main motion, which is to receive the policy. That council approve the professional development and discretionary expenses account policy CL 2020-01 is attached here too. Lots of good discussion. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. I'm going to look to the clerk because we had scheduled the special meeting to start at 7. Should we push ahead and complete this now, or would you prefer that I adjourn this, do the special meeting, and then come back?
Especially with this to follow immediately afterwards. So I have to just
check. I had 7 in the agenda. So that being the case, we do not have any additional new members of the public here. So what I'll do is get, unless there's an objection from council, that we follow, because it does say 7 p.m. on the special meeting agenda. Unless there's an objection to council, of any council member, then I proceed to propose that we finish this. Councillor Hanlon?
I just wanted to point out, and I don't mind when it's dealt with, but there were 2 matters I had wanted to address on the other business.
That's right. So that's why I'm looking to extend, because we've come to the end of the staff reports, but I know you have 2 matters under other business, so I wanted to give you adequate time.
Okay, thank you.
Before we proceed to our special meeting. So unless there's an objection from anyone on council, then I propose that we continue with this to get and give Councillor Hamlin the opportunity to address her items, and then we will convene. We'll have a brief recess and we'll convene the special meeting 10 minutes after we adjourn this SIC meeting. So unless there's any objections. Okay, seeing none, then we'll continue. So that concludes the staff reports. There's nothing on the consent agenda. There's no department updates that I see. I'm getting nods in the negative. So we're under other business. And 8.1 is community aspirations regarding youth, and that's you, Councillor Ham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I really just wanted to piggyback on the presentation that the Collingwood Youth Centre made for just a few minutes, really. I mentioned that there was an ad hoc committee that is meeting and continues to meet. I thought I should just recognize who's participating in this committee. So other than myself and Lee Pankhurst from the Collingwood Youth Centre, it's Roz Morrison, Nancy Griffin, Martin Oosterveld, Jake Johnson, and Melanie Rodriguez. There's a few things that we are continuing to talk about, and perhaps these things will come back to council in due course. Melanie Rodriguez, who I mentioned, who sits on the committee, is an extraordinarily, it's an extraordinary young woman, let's just say. She grew up in Thornbury. She now works in Toronto at the nonprofit network, but was distinguished by being appointed by the federal government to attend the youth portion of the G7 summit last year. And so she calls in to attend our meetings, and she's offered at the appropriate time to prepare a youth advocacy guide. So I think, in due course, we'll be spending more time thinking around what that will be about, and she'll be working on that. Also, there's something called a vital conversation that the Community Foundation for Grey Bruce will be initiating this year, probably in the spring, and will be focused on youth, that is being adults and young adults under the age of 30, which is a welcome addition to the social information we'll have about this community. Also, the nonprofit network that Melanie Rodriguez works at may be able to come to town. I hope there'll be no cost to us, but we're having some discussions. They have a young person there who is a PhD student funded by the Atkinson Foundation, and he can come to town and talk about decent work for youth in the context of nonprofit organizations, but also would have application to any kind of work, really. And decent work for youth not only is around salaries and working conditions, but also from an employer's point of view, retention challenges, and also would deal with things like respect and equity in the workplace. So that is something else we're talking about. And lastly, Robert Bernard's Youthful Cities Index is a major undertaking for a community like ours to get involved in. And so our committee is talking to other municipalities in due course and seeing if some funds can be raised to have such an index undertaken for our area. I've also been made aware recently that Mr. Bernard's has added an index to his portfolio, which is the Urban Work Index. And what it looks at is how does your community stack up in terms of others for being attractive to you. So sort of measuring where we are now. All to say, there's lots of interesting things going on that hopefully will support youth to be engaged and happy in our community and come back, and so we can also attract other youth. I look forward to reporting further to council, and if any councillor or a member of the public wants to be involved, my email's on the website. Okay, secondly.
I'm going to stop you there.
Sorry, thank you.
Are there any questions or comments, council? All right, go ahead.
Okay. Number 2. Mr. Mayor, although there's been no reported cases to date of the coronaviruses in Simcoe County, and although the province has assured us that the overall risk to Ontarians remains low, certainly the province and the federal government has started taking decisive steps to prepare for any scenario.
as this is a quickly evolving situation globally. Now, I've had a chance, of course, to discuss this, our responsibilities as a community with our CAO. And as such, through Mr. Mayor, I wanted to give our CAO Min a chance to bring our council and our community up to date on what plans the town is putting in place with respect to this matter. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the question is really business continuation plans. Certainly the province and the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit are on top of the health aspects, and we work very closely through the fire department, and Chief Barr is our head of emergencies operations, and we have annual exercises to make sure that we're compliant, and we've been approved as compliant this year. And so I think on the health front, we have things covered off, and I'll ask the CAO to talk about the business continuity plan.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Hamlin and the public and other members of council. So we've, obviously this is a potentially, a situation that could potentially become a serious one for us. I mean, we're not impacted as of now, but I think that's something that we can sort of rely on, and I expect that things can change fairly quickly. So I've had some discussions with my counterpart at the county level to get a better understanding of what the county is doing in terms of preparing for this. The CEO indicated to me that they're having ongoing conversations with the public health officials, and that his emergency coordinator is working closely with the public health officials and other emergency personnel across the county to try and ensure that they've got a coordinated and a consorted and a expedited response if anything were to happen. At the municipal level, we've had several conversations amongst department heads about what our responses should be and need to be, and I want to assure the public and members of council that we've got a plan in place and we could ramp up this plan fairly quickly if we discover that any of this impact on our community in particular, but also on neighboring communities. So I'll just quickly go through the kind of things that we've talked about. And one is to develop a communications plan that addresses public awareness and public health issues. So this would be an attempt to try and communicate within the corporation to our own staff, but also to the public about what some personal hygiene measures that could be taken to try and minimize the risk of this spreading. So we're looking at information provided by the World Health Organization, we're looking at information provided by the county, and we're trying to ensure that we have a consistent set of messages across the organization on best practices when it comes to public health and public hygiene, and we're going to try at appropriate time to disperse that information through our website to members of the public. We're also looking internally at how we manage staff illness and our approach to staff being ill. Right now we have some protocols that staff have to follow, i.e. if staff is away for more than 3 days, they have to provide a medical certificate. We're looking at whether or not we need to relax those rules, and I've asked our HR officer to prepare a letter to go to all staff to articulate what our policy would be in the event of us being impacted by this. One of the things that we talked about is to make sure that we have the ability to encourage staff to work from home if that's what's required, so that if they're at risk or anyone in their household is at risk, we can manage that risk appropriately in terms of our own workforce. So we're looking at what we need to do from an HR perspective to ensure that we keep our staff healthy. We're also looking at an essential services plan, and this plan will be headed up by Director Sama, and this has to do with how do we ensure that we continue to deliver those services that we need to deliver, in particular water, wastewater, and also snow plowing at this time of the year. The other thing we're keenly aware of is level of service. So if this were to impact on us and level of service is impacted, how can we minimize the municipality's fiscal and legal exposure if the quality of service is less than what we would have articulated in our policy or what the public would have expected. We're also looking at some custodian protocols, i.e. how do we disinfect the offices and equipment at the end of the day. So we're looking at some enhanced protocols in that regard and looking at what others are doing, and we're going to try and provide our custodians with some additional supplies so they can deal with some of that appropriately, including rolling stock. The one thing we talked about is that there are some municipalities, for example, the City of Toronto is looking at how they deal with TTC buses and streetcars and subways at the end of the day. We're looking at how we might be able to replicate some of that with our rolling stock in terms of transit buses, but also the equipment that we use by our own staff. We have vehicles that staff uses. How can we ensure that we provide some additional scrutiny on disinfecting those equipments at the end of the day? We're also looking at an IT plan to deal with working remotely. Not all of our staff have the capacity to do that now, and we're looking at what needs to be put in place to ensure that we facilitate that. I've asked the clerk to look at existing protocol, existing bylaw, and to prepare a report to come back to council to seek approval to either modify, suspend, amend those bylaws to allow us to deal with emergency if that were to happen. So there are things that to deal with procurement, for example, that we would want some flexibility on if the situation arose. So some of that recommendations will be brought forward to council. There might be need to delegate some additional authority down to staff in the event of an emergency, and some of those provisions are being looked at by the clerk. We're also looking at, from a financial services, if we had to, for example, close down town hall for whatever reason, how do we relieve taxpayers from any obligation they might have in terms of, for example, paying taxes. I think it would be reasonable to assume that we will waive any penalty, but that's a decision that council would have to make, and we'll bring some of those recommendations forward to council. We're also looking at how we deal with some other frontline services, and if we were to shut down town hall, there are one or two things that we'd have to provide. For example, death registration is something that we have to provide and is required, and we're looking at options of actually issuing some of those certificates at the funeral homes, for example, if that's practical. So, and then we also talk a lot about how we might be able to use some of the services currently available through our fire services department to manage, in the event of an emergency, other departmental considerations. So things like, they've got special washing machine to deal with clothing that might be contaminated, looking at some of their decontamination techniques that might be applied across the organization as well. And also looking at what opportunities you might have to convene outside of town hall to facilitate any emergency that might occur. And amongst the things that the clerk will bring to council for consideration is the ability to, within the municipal act and within that parameters, to allow for members to be able to participate in meetings remotely. So I think we've got a fairly comprehensive plan in place to try and bring all this together. The expectation is that department heads will finalize some of these protocols by next week, and we will begin to be ready to implement those protocols if and when it's necessary. But I think council and the public should be assured that this is top of mind for us. We understand the risks that this could pose, and we're taking it seriously, and we're putting in some measures in place to address what is within our purview. So I hope that helps.
Thank you,
Thanks
CAO.
very much. Thank you very much, and also to staff for their hard work on this. Thank you.
Council, any questions or comments about that? Deputy Mayor.
The one area that wasn't referred to, or if it was, I missed it and I apologize, but it just reminded me I had a son that was born on the end and the beginning of two significant events, and the end was the end of SARS, the beginning was the Gulf War. the Second Gulf War. And it was compliments to our local hospital through their work, through the work of the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit and the way that they handled that. My understanding is that their procedures, policies have been worked upon and implemented as a result of what they did back then, and then they are thoroughly prepared for, I'm not even going to touch this particular issue, they are prepared for any event, period.
Thank you. Yes, wash your hands, sanitizer, and fist bumps.
Elbows.
All right. Councillor McLeod, you have your motion, and so the clerk has handed me the following. What I propose to do is read it, and you can nod your head, and then it will be on the agenda for the next council meeting. That staff provide public disclosure for 2019 council expenses as proposed in the staff report T2020-04. Did I read that right?
I would like the word itemized in there, if that's possible.
Okay, so if we change that to read, staff provide public disclosure, full
Can I take a crack at it?
itemized public disclosure for the 2019 council expenses.
I got something written that I could take a crack at, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
That staff provided fulsome and itemized accounting of councillors' professional and discretionary expenses from 2019 and henceforth to be published on the town's website in addition to the statutory expense reporting requirements.
Okay, I guess what we want to make sure is that that melds with the 2020 policy. Is that consistent with the policy? Okay, so you know what I think I'm going to suggest? We have the thrust of your motion. Maybe you can get together with the clerk and you can publish it in the next agenda, and we will consider notice served today.
Sure, thank you.
Does that work?
Okay.
Okay, so we'll leave that in your hands. So that brings us to the conclusion of the SIC agenda. So I propose that we meet back here at 20 to 8 to begin the special meeting. Would you like to do a delegation, Matthew? Okay, come on forward then, please. And what's the topic of your delegation today?
I'd like to follow up with some comments I made during the year, just briefly.
Okay, Councillor Ellis got to step out. Go ahead, Matthew. You get 5 minutes.
Okay, this is important. Okay, so that was a really good recommendation about this coronavirus. In Korea right now, I know a fellow that's not even working. The offices and places are closed. Public responsibility to take care of oneself should be the message that probably these two persons would hopefully write about, encouraging people to take it upon themselves to look after themselves, because this could really turn out to be a big thing. And we need to say, okay, well, look after yourself and wash your computer desk. Like I do that at the public library, I'll wash the keyboard and the screen and the desk and the chair. I would like to request as well the custodians working in the day to do custodial work in the day, instead of waiting until everyone's gone or no one's around. I've been noticing there's not a lot of work going on with regards to custodial work, except salt and snow. Those are main things that are really important, plus, surveillance and security. But I would say custodial work in the day needs to be ramped up, and maybe hire more people for the buses, like you were saying, Fareed, and these kinds of things. Maybe you need a few extra people, or you need to move some people around to take attention to that. This is a big deal. I have a very limited amount of time. This is a question for PRC, and a quick one for Ms. Hamlin, Councillor Hamlin. Just wondering, I noticed there's a lot of trucks and rocks in the Sunset Cove Park over at Birch Street Park. You put up some big rocks to hold back sticks and sediment and different things. Is there any chance of putting in the yellow pillars that I was asking about at the dockyard where the construction's happening, where we have all the kids' camps and our tourism, general residents? Is there any chance we'll be able to see that installation of yellow markers at the dockyards, other places in town. Let's make this fast. The other one, guys, I'm actually a bit angry because we didn't transition from Elvis Festival very well. And I understand, and as according to Councillor Madigan at his private shop, he said, yeah, the city of Vaughan might take it on as a town private-public initiative. Very interesting, and I've heard that from 2 other people now as well. Now the main thing is, yes, people have the ability to rent venues, do different activities, that kind of thing. But you know what I'm really upset about? We are becoming very strange as a population. I think we need to turn off electronics. We need to think about what does co-creation mean? And that's helping each other, like gardening, activities, chores, modeling, that kind of stuff. But I get upset. I've been to different camps and things, and I know this exists. I understand it. But co-creation is so important. We're becoming these asexual people who are so into their personal electronics. It's total asexuality. And I'm sick of it. I'm absolutely sick of it.
Okay, and
I'm
we're
sick of it.
looking for something related to the SIC.
And I think people need to man up, talk about relationships. What is it like to be family planning? You know, how to save money for that. It burns me to think that the churches are empty, all this other fiddling around with entertainment. We got through Elvis finally. That was a hell of a festival. But I tell you, what are we doing with regards to morality and family planning in the future? It sickens me to think that we do nothing except adopt all this stuff. I don't think people are getting married very much these days. Schools, the whole 9 yards, it's trouble. Family planning, I'd love to see a festival designed with that. Stuff to do with families. How to make a family.
Very nice.
It burns me.
We got your point.
Absolutely burns me.
Thank you.
I hate it.
All right. So, seeing no other deputations, I will look for a motion to adjourn.
Yep.
Councillor Madigan, all in favor? We have adjourned, so we'll be back here, let's make it 7:45 for the special meeting. We have food and supplies here for those that need it, and you're welcome to take a break, bio break, and we'll see you then. Thank you.